Welcome to the Leela Life Show. I'm your host, Linda Andrews, and you've tuned in to the right place to up-level in your life and business. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Leela Life Show. This is your host, Linda Andrews, and I am joined with Melanie Weller, an amazing medical visionary. Her focus, and we're going to talk a lot today, is around the vagus nerve, which is like ding, 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 I think holds so much for us, which she and I will unpack for you today. And 25 years of experience, leading edge systems. She is a physical therapist, board certified orthopedic clinical specialist, and a slew of other amazing certifications. And thank you, Melanie, so much for being here. If there's anything I missed, spotlight yourself, but thank you. We're so excited.
I'm so excited to be here, Linda. Thank you for having me.
I think one of the things that we share a love for as you continue to navigate and dive through is consciousness. And I was introduced to the vagus nerve through my yoga teacher training. And there's these little words in the world that I'm like, oh, these are really important. And the vagus nerve is one of those two words. And, things like epigenetics, neuroplasticity, it's like these things hold the keys for so much healing. And some of the information of yours that I've dove into is just this connecting to trauma, which we find ourselves, I think, in a time where I feel comfortable saying everyone has experienced trauma. So I'm particularly excited to talk about the vagus nerve as it relates to trauma. But first, a little background on yourself, how you became a lover of the vagus nerve. Tell us a little about your path.
Sure. So I was introduced to the vagus nerve very early in my career through some continuing education courses that I took, and how to treat it as a pinched nerve at the base of the skull. And I also concurrently ended up working in clinics that treated people that had failed multiple other interventions.
Mm.
And so it was this great kind of magic wand technique that when my regular things weren't working, and when you work at a clinic that treats people that have not responded to conventional things, you often do a lot of unconventional things. So like our normal wasn't necessarily everybody else's normal. But when things weren't going as expected, I would decompress the vagus nerve at the base of the skull. And it was endlessly amazing to see people's knee pain and foot pain and back pain and things in very seemingly distant parts of the body really transform. And fast forward many years to when I had my own practice, my own life really started falling apart. And I had really, by this point, built this system of evaluating and treating the vagus nerve as a pinched nerve in the body at multiple locations. Because we know through the research that stress and trauma always affect the voice and the breath. And our vocal cords and our diaphragms, the muscle we breathe with, are horizontally oriented in the body. And so are our pelvic floors, for example. And in extreme trauma, people might lose bladder control or bowel control as well. And so we really embody stress and trauma on the horizontal plane in our bodies. And then when my life started falling apart, what I really had to reconcile was all of these credentials I collected and all of these hard skills that I had with my own intuition and my own connection with consciousness, because that is also very strong. And what I really love with patients is helping them with those spiritual and stress related underpinnings of their physical dysfunction, because the body's really just expressing what's going on in their lives. And when you can have a conversation with the person and with the body, you often get much, much more than logical clinical algorithms can offer, especially with complicated patients. And I say that with a lot of love, but with people that just haven't responded to
The normal
to the
treatments.
normal treatments, right? And so in bringing that together, I really came to understand the vagus nerve as the bridge between your story and your body.
It's beautiful.
And for all of my clinical skills and my ability to measure it and everything, I'm always amazed that when you ask the right questions and tap into the story that's happening with the person, that a lot of the like that can shift range of motion and that shifts pain, and it's uh and it keeps things really fun and interesting, and it gets people unstuck from their own story, because that's, we all get in that trap. And we know through the research also that when that, for example, back pain patients that know their MRI results have higher pain levels than those that don't know their MRI results, because you take it on as part of your story.
Mhm.
And so with my intuition, I think I really felt, or I know I really felt like something very logical was happening here. Like there's a system, like there's something happening here, then I just need to figure out what it is. I'm not really just pulling things out of thin air. There's something really uh, consistent happening here. And I've worked with treating metaphor in the body for a long time, and reflecting that language back to people when people tell me they feel like they have a knot or there's an ice pick stabbing them or whatever. And I have very gentle hands, and I work with people remotely too. And I'll reflect that language back with them. Oh, we're just taking the ice pick out. We're untangling the knot, whatever. One of the most profound experiences I had was with somebody who told me they were like a sponge filled with water and they just needed to be wrung out. But
Mm.
if I made her twist, that would have increased her pain. And I gave her a way to get wrung out that didn't involve her having to twist. And it was incredible what that did. So this idea of story in the body has really had been percolating in my own consciousness for a long time. And when I took a couple steps back to really figure out how I wanted to show up authentically in my practice, I learned that mythology was a mode of communicating scientific information. And my first thought that I had when I learned that was a very physical therapist kind of thought. It's like, okay, well, if the earth is at a 23.5 degree tilt, what's 23.5 degrees from the midline of the body? And in all of my anatomy books, and I've had a chance to look at real skulls since, that where the vagus nerve exits the base of the skull is 23.5 degrees from the center of where the spinal cord exits.
Wow.
And we know through the research that when solar and space weather disrupt the electromagnetic field of the earth, it's measurable in our vagus nerves. And the extent to which it's disruptive depends on the strength of our interpersonal connections. And so our vagus nerve is really this connection to consciousness, to the bigger picture, and I think quite literally to the cosmos. And for me, it really it holds the way the cosmos is coded into us. And this is most easy to understand, though it works through many other uh, storytelling and traditions as well, through Western astrology. The ventricles of the brain look just like the ram's horns that represent Aries, and in astrology, Aries rules the head. And the way the hyoid bone in the throat sits on top of the larynx looks just like the symbol for Taurus, and Taurus rules the throat. And the aortic arch is the same shape as the symbol for Leo, and Leo rules the heart. And so when you're Aries, like your heroics, when you're stuck being the hero in someone else's story at the expense of your own, and your desires, your Taurus, you're satisfying everybody else's desires at the expense of your own, for example, are competing with each other, then that compresses your vagus nerve at the base of your skull. And so and I've created a whole form of energy medicine around this as well. And it even works down at the cellular level too. And so uh, it's, well, I will say that getting people better is my drug of choice. So I have so much fun getting, just eliciting these transformations, especially in people that nobody else has really been able to solve. And really being able to look at it through evaluating the body quite physically and objectively in the transverse plane and contextualizing it around even their heart rate variability measurement, which is a measure of vagus nerve function. And then really being able to go in through story as well as structure and just, it's just such a privilege to see get so many magical transformations.
Well, and one of the things, you talk about this portal to health and paradigm shifting
Hmm.
in yourself as a visionary. And as you were first talking, it's like so much is flashing, like this feels upside down, quote unquote, or does this feel right side up? And it's like this earth shattering medical paradigm is like, or not. It
Or
just,
not, right? It's
or
just I'm just putting it. I'm just giving like an algorithm. Like I'm speaking
totally.
it. I mean, it's obviously been around for years and for millennia, but
It just to me to illustrate, like, because you'll talk to someone and this will sound so foreign, and that's the person that's been to all the people that can't find, right, the remedy.
yeah,
And something that's really been clicking to me is like the role of stress, and I'd love to hear, the connection of stress with the vagus nerve
sure,
from your opinion. But it so much, if not all, connects to stress. We talked about trauma a little bit, and I think unfortunately, or fortunately for the emerging paradigm, we've this actually clicked for me yesterday. I thought to myself, maybe we are not complex systems. Meaning, like, we've been made to be complex systems, but maybe at the heart is like this simple system that has very basics that are not being met, that's made us complex systems. And I was like, oh, this is like the thought of the day. But again, getting back to stress and the
hmm,
vagus nerve, like, why is
yeah,
this important? Why do people need to understand their vagus nerve and the role in
right.
health, and then of course the role of stress?
Well, we know that medically that stress is 75%, 75 to 90% of all disease and illness. So we
Let's just
know,
pause. 75 to 90% of all disease and illness. For those of you that have your stress on lock, maybe not. Just want to like take a mirror moment here. 75 to 90% of all illness comes from stress. Please continue
right?
on.
We don't talk very specifically about what stress means.
Mhm.
Like we say that we need to meditate and exercise, and we have lots of remedies for it, but we don't really dig very deeply into it. Unless you work with a Jungian psychotherapist or somebody along those lines, people often don't really dig very deep into what the stress really is. And the vagus nerve is the biggest part of our parasympathetic nervous system. So it's the counterpart to our fight and flight, our sympathetic nervous system. And so when we are in stress and trauma, our fight and flight gets dialed up and our vagus nerve tends to get dialed down. And I'll say at least the front part of the vagus nerve does. There is a part of the vagus nerve that will towards the back side of the body that will send you into freeze mode in more severe trauma.
Okay.
But generally speaking, your fight and flight is going to increase your stress, and your vagus nerve is going to be your grace under pressure. It's going to be all of your pleasurable sensations. It mediates inflammation. The vagus nerve starts in the brainstem and goes all the way down to the pelvis. It innervates your vocal cords, your heart, and your digestive system. So it's literally your gut brain, it's literally your heart brain, and it's literally your voice. It
And there's
is,
the pelvic floor. So
and it's
maybe
all
like,
in, yes.
yeah.
And in women, it goes into the cervix
Hmm. So the
as
pleasure
well.
centers, right?
Yes, yes, yep. And we know, and there's research shows that women with complete spinal cord injuries can have orgasm with vagus nerve stimulation at the cervix.
Wow.
So, and sexual arousal in general is a parasympathetic response.
Hmm.
So it's very intimately connected to arousal and pleasure. And the vagus nerve is in almost all of your organs, sending information up to your brain. And when we get cut off at those horizontal thresholds in the body through stress and trauma, our brains don't get good information. I am actively looking for people that will collaborate to help me with some mental health research, because I know exactly how to spot somebody's in suicide ideation by their
Mm,
biomechanical tests. And I've asked enough people that and the answer's been yes
mhm.
every single time, that I know that this needs to be part of a screening for mental health.
Yeah, I'm wondering it because that mental health first aid, that sounds like a perfect tool. I know there's that certification, mental health first aid. If what you're talking about could be implemented, that sounds like a nice partnership. So we
Oh,
got to get
right.
you with the mental health
I would
first
love
aid
to be
people
I
and
would love
find
to
the
be introduced to
dollars and
that. Right.
yes, make
Right.
that happen. It's in
That
the podcast ethers.
Yes, yes. No, please reach out to me with any connections on that. And when this really hit me many or a number of years ago now, when I had somebody come to me with an acute onset of hallucinations, and had a stress event that had caused this acute onset, and he had been rejected by some other practitioners, and he was not what he was going on was not necessarily in my wheelhouse at the time. But I knew I couldn't turn him away, and I knew who to get him to, the right people to get him to for help beyond what I could do. So I thought, oh, I'll just decompress his vagus nerve and get him the other help that he needs. And at the end of our session, 90% of his hallucinations were gone. And he texted me later that night and said, Melanie, you saved my life, and not in the cute kind of way. Like, I was really on the verge of, like, I was really planning to kill myself his, because he was living in such a nightmare where everybody's faces were melting, and
Wow.
it was not sustainable for him. And so, to understand, uh, like, our brains, our cognitive verbal parts of our brain process information at 40 bits per second. Our nonverbal parts of our brain in our bodies transmit information at 11 million bits per second.
Wow.
So when you can, I really think that people that are in more of a depressive suicide ideation state of being are just, those at 11 million bits per second has just been dialed down really far. And but it also, I'm in, at the core, I've spent most of my years in doing orthopedic physical therapy,
Mhm.
with pain. And so it works really well with physical pain too. And anxiety, I've treated lots of anxiety. People with anxiety tend not to be shut down quite as systemically as people with depression.
Mhm.
It tends to be a little bit more localized, but your vagus nerve is just in so many parts of your body, and it uses the same neurotransmitters that your muscles, the neurotransmitter that your muscles do. So you get really beautiful changes in the way that you move, both physically and metaphorically, through life
Mhm.
when you address the vagus nerve. And when you have, fundamentally, if I'm just going to talk objectively about it, what would say what vagus nerve compression does, especially when you get it at multiple sites, is it takes away your shock absorption. And beyond that, I would say when you get past a certain amount of physical shock absorption, when you've lost a certain amount of it, you also lose emotional shock absorption and spiritual shock absorption. And then your body just really starts to shut down, or you're not able to give your brain really good information. And medicine usually, they have this very top down approach most of the time to the body, versus like, how do we get the body right to give the brain better information?
Right. This is so fascinating. Like the shock absorber, I'm feeling this like collective shock absorption for a moment where, we're living in 2021 and some people or a lot of people could be at the end of their shock absorptions, right?
Yeah,
It's been a heck of
absolutely.
an 18 months. And oh, it's been a heck of an 18 months on top of 10 years, 40 years, 70 years, however much life you have under your belt that was already at the end of your shock absorption. And, when you walk to the grocery store and someone might seem a little untethered right now, like to me, this highlights the extra importance of compassion right now, because if someone's dialed down that low from their shock absorption or, inaccessibility to this, maybe compassion's the only answer in moments like that. And then like the vagal nerve adjustment.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that, you know, I will tell you that I fundamentally believe self-compassion heals everything. Like if you can get to that point, you won't need any other medicine. Like
Mhm,
you've got it. But the uh like it can be hard when you're really locked down, and I'll speak to that from even my own personal experience, because I spent years with a voice in my head, a very self-destructive pattern of thoughts that,
mhm,
oh, you know, like I do want to kill myself and I do want to die. And never, I don't know that I would have ever acted upon it, but I certainly consciously chose to do things like not own a gun because I didn't want to make it easy
mhm,
for myself. And the, and when you're in it, it like we're not here to do it alone either. It's okay to have, to let other people help pull you out of it. And, and I recognize where over and over when we're in places where I really could have gone down the road being one of my patients,
mhm,
those complicated chronic pain patients, that somebody was there to help me and to correct my course all of those times. And so, and I'm very fundamentally wired to do it all by myself. And
as are
so,
so many, right?
as are so many, you know, and uh, yeah, and I think that it's, we know more about our cars than we do about our bodies. And not only, you know, I talk a lot about trauma through the lens of the mythology of Isis and Osiris, which is an
Mhm,
Egyptian myth. And in the story, Osiris gets chopped into pieces by his brother. And he was the king of Egypt, and he ultimately goes on to be the king of the underworld, which for the Egyptians was where all life came from and all treasures were found. And we use dismemberment metaphors in our language all the time. We say we're falling apart, we can't get it together, our lives are shattered, our hearts are broken. And when you imagine being in that story, or at least when I imagine being in that
mhm,
story, I imagine pretty much everybody thought Osiris's destiny was to be the king of Egypt. But his true destiny was to be the king of the underworld. And he literally had to come apart to come back together in a new way. And that's really the gift in trauma, or the opportunity in it, because you can't be the same person that you were previously. And when you
ever, just
ever,
ever,
exactly,
ever,
right. There's
ever.
no, right.
Cannot ever go back to that person.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely. And then when, I think about it with medicine, so I call this the Osiris wound. And when I look at medicine as an institution, medicine has a terrible Osiris wound. And ISIS hasn't shown up to put medicine back together yet. They haven't figured out how to come back together in a new way. We see lots of specialists, and not unrightfully so, because there's
Mhm,
a lot of knowledge to hold. And it's too much to ask one person to hold the knowledge of all the medical specialties that exist. But I think this is where looking through an archetypal lens and through a story-based lens can really start to identify some patterns and help people get to the root of their stress. So really finding that uh, connection between your body and your story. And it's where the vagus nerve is really, really helpful too. But we're wired for story. With story, we remember 70% more, 80% longer. And we get incredible uh, dopamine rushes and oxytocin releases. And uh, as the vagus nerve innervates the heart, your heart also makes oxytocin, which is the hormone that makes us all feel connected. Your heart is an endocrine gland, uh, and so to really uh, tap into people through story, you end up on that neurological superhighway. It really gets you into that, um, into your vagus nerve and into those, so it gets you into both the hard truths and, the places like it that really, the truth of what really makes you feel good, because we can really be gluttons for punishment.
Mhm.
Pain and pleasure are processed in the same parts of the brain, and we often dig into our wounds and recreate our wounds over and over because the pain and pleasure are so intertwined, and we don't often we don't consciously differentiate. Our
True fear.
subconscious
Yeah.
runs that
Yeah.
program.
It's like I sometimes my mind will be in binary, and it's like instead of going for the one, we're always going for the negative one. Like you could
Yes.
have gone to either, but we're just, oh, the negative one, that groove is built in. I'm just going to keep going to the negative one, the negative one. You could at any moment go to the one and continue to go to the one. It's always available, but we're just fixed in the negative one. Like I say it as simple as that can be because it's like we're not getting it. Like let's make it that simple. Let's make it that simple. And like this is coming from a trauma survivor or thriver or whatever you want to say. Like that I've had to untether within myself. So it's like I'm not delusional. I get it. I get the hard truths that you're alluding to. It doesn't make it easy, but in every moment you get these choices. And I think the grace piece is some people are so caught off from even knowing that that moment exists, right? Like, oh, maybe I'm just so disconnected that I am only able to go to the negative one. And these are when these innervations are just truly critical.
Absolutely. You have like if you're in what I call full vagus nerve lockdown
Mhm.
or a very severe end of compression, you do not have the bandwidth to make the choice to one. Like it really doesn't exist. It's not in your field. And getting some extra bandwidth to deal with the stress or to even see the stress and be able to rationalize what's going on in your life can be incredibly powerful. And it doesn't take, the most amazing thing to me about this is that the exercises I teach for this and the work I do is not incredibly complex in my own mind. Like it's really like, okay, you're stuck here. Let's just put it back where it needs to be, or let's do this exercise. And
Like
that's
looking at like this reminds me of like the simple, like let's let it be a simple system in
I,
these examples.
absolutely. I think we make healing way too hard. And that's been a big part of my mission is to really like, let's play the game of how easy that we can make this. And that's something that I didn't know what I was doing when I was doing it, but I've done my entire career because when you treat people that are in like have been around the block a few times, they have biomechanical dysfunction head to toe. And as a clinician, you can kind of make yourself a little crazy sometimes figuring out where to start or thinking about like, oh my gosh, this person's really
And then this part and
right,
this
right,
part, yeah.
right. And they're hurting in 5 different places and which one do I pick and whatnot. But the game I always played with myself was what 1, 2, or 3 things can I do that make 10, 20, or 30 things better for this person?
Mhm.
And that's the game that medicine really needs to be playing. And the vagus nerve, just by virtue of the number of things it innervates, is a beautiful target for that strategy. And the research around it that's coming out is really amazing. I mean, I've been screaming vagus nerve into the wind for 15 years at
Is
least.
anybody listening? Come
Right.
on.
And so like now the research is starting to catch up. And we know that how well your vagus nerve functions has predictive value for how long people with pancreatic cancer will live. And we know that when they put electrical stimulation on the vagus nerve, that it repairs the mitochondrial defects in the cells that go with heart disease.
Wow.
And we know that when you pair vagus nerve stimulation with an auditory stimulus, it remaps your brain at the highest levels. And I could go on and on and on. I mean, the
Yeah.
research is just amazing.
One of the
So
things I saw going through some of your work, it was, side note, I'm obsessed with soil. Okay. I love soil. And what I find interesting in this like cosmic mirroring back to Earth is we have this mycelium to the myelin to then
Hmm.
whatever we want to take into the cosmos, which maybe we could say stars or there's a better name, but it's like such mirrored. And I don't understand the myelin's connection fully to the vagus nerve, but I know this is all really important on every level, like with the soil to the mycelium to,
Well, I
all the
would
way
say
through.
that your vagus nerve is very much like the mycelium network of your body.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I would say that the Laniakea supercluster is the cosmic equivalent. And
Okay.
our Milky Way galaxy is one little teeny tiny dot in the Laniakea supercluster, but it looks like a big vagus nerve. And the the myelin, that's the insulation on the nerves, is it wraps around, it's a coil around the nerve. It's concentric, so it's got this very orbital arrangement on the nerve, and so it's really held in that solar rotation or stellar rotation kind of pattern. And I would say that fundamentally, the root of all of our ills is the lack of a cohesive cosmology. When our lives are fractured and we can't make sense of, when we feel like our work life and our personal life and our inner being and our outer being are all these different things, and we don't have a way to figure out how they relate and figure out how they make sense, that the rub between all of that is fundamentally what stress is.
Mm.
And I mean, and we all have a physical expression of our internal narrative, our internal story, and we have an internal expression of our physical narrative, our external story. And the rub between those two things is really any compression point. And for all of the, like we medically, like we need the technical pieces of things for sure, but I don't think that's necessarily how we have to deliver them to patients all the time,
Mhm.
because story has so much meaning to it, and it is a great mirror for us to look at and figure out how this is being mirrored in our lives.
It's interesting the power of language as its own healing tool, like the role of the words. And I know it's even part of that. It's part of this work with the vagus nerve is sound and making words, using language. And
Absolutely.
as you're talking about story, it's like you could say a word that could unlock something in me right now for instant healing. It's so interconnected. And I like when you talk about these rubs as a stress. I think these two words, stress and trauma, we make them be, again, way more complex. It's like maybe just anything out of smooth sailing equals these two words in their own way, right? We could define trauma different from stress. We're all experiencing these things all the time,
Oh,
maybe,
absolutely. Well, and
right?
I absolutely, and
It's
I would say
right.
fundamentally, no stress is not necessarily a good thing either. Like
Right.
stress, stress is like when you exercise, the stress with which you lift a weight is what builds the muscle.
Hmm.
And I think stress can be a sign. Like when my life was falling apart, I was having all sorts of foot pain, and I was like, all right, my path and purpose is clearly about to change.
Hmm.
Or there's something about my path and purpose that I need to figure out, because my feet are just on fire, like, and not in a good way.
Right.
And so, we can really look at, our bodies. For me, this whole, like working with the vagus nerve and working with the cosmology that I find that it holds, is like speaking to the body in its original language.
Mm.
And that's like, I don't really have other words for it. Like, that's just
Mhm.
fundamentally like what it is to me, that you've bypassed so much of the garbage, and not everybody can take in sometimes, I mean, I get where, the magic as a clinician is, and really as a coach or whatever you're doing is meeting people where they are. You
Mhm.
have to, like not everybody can necessarily go full into the mythology on the first visit.
Yeah,
Like you
and
just
even
need.
this, the one thing that was really interesting about you said something about the energetics of this at one point, and one thing I've been pondering a lot lately is how there's a lot of energy moving if you subscribe to energy. We have a lot of energy, I think, always moving, and then we're in maybe a historically energetically heightened time. And so when you have your nervous system, which you're an expert in, moving through all this energy, and are you able to handle it? It is like a very basic question. And how do you know if you're able to handle it? Well, we could simply look at how's your body doing, right? We could let that be the measure. And these tools right now are, wherever you are in the pain spectrum, critical because there's a lot of energy moving right now. And what I like about this story, using the story, but it's like, what's the story that we're creating, right? What you're a visionary. What's the stories we're creating? Can we not only move the energy through that we need to be able to move through present day, but be able to handle all the energy that needs to move through to create what we're visioning? And most people are in a state of constant stress. Forget visioning, right? Forget what we're moving into. I'm addicted or I'm locked into the program of what I'm in.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that we won't have time today, but I think that, is an interesting conversation in the bigger picture about what's out in our movies and our media and like on how that shapes our reality and our consciousness as well. But another way to frame the root of all stress and can you in terms of handling it is uh I that fundamentally stress is also resisting your own expansion in an ever expanding universe.
Can you say that again very slowly, please?
Fundamentally, the source of all of our ills, the source of any disease or dysfunction, is resisting your own expansion in our ever expanding universe.
Let that be your medicine for today, everyone. Thank you. I think this is so critical because it's like defying the laws of nature by keeping things small, keeping self small, when, could all the resistance you're experiencing be you in opposition of what life wants to be through you?
Yeah, it absolutely. Well, and we're fundamentally wired for stability. Like change is threatening to our nervous systems at some level. And when I had that realization about the expansion, I live in New Orleans, and when they were taking down the Confederate statues here, I was driving by the Jefferson Davis statue 4 times a day, taking my kids to and from school. And the protesters that were out at the time I was driving by, like, I wish I had felt safe enough to stop and take pictures
Mm.
because I've never seen so many canes, walkers, wheelchairs, motorized scooters, oxygen tanks, surgical masks outside of a hospital. And it was so interesting to see these people that had so much disability protesting these statues that can't expand either. And it just, I think, really spoke to that. And there's some research that supports that people that have more fixed ideologies have more health issues as well.
Mhm.
And so the more growth mindset oriented you can be, the more big picture, the more you can zoom out into your own big picture and the collective big picture, that those are the things that help you personally the most, I think. It really keeps you from getting uh, I really think that those kind of mindset shifts can really uh, affect your body that really and at the end of the day, I will say that I contend that it's not even about your mindset, it's about your body set.
Mm, I love
but,
that. I
but
love that. Go ahead.
yeah, your body set is giving your body's because your body's just giving information to your brain so much faster than your brain can give it to your body, that your body's set is really driving your mindset.
Wow. What I was wondering, this is a selfish question, and I know we're coming to a close. So there's two questions I have for you. One is, where does vagus nerve and how, if at all, connect or relate to pineal gland?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't have a direct answer for that.
Okay. I mean, I'm assuming messaging is a part of it, but I would just love to know the intimacy of that relationship. And it's just a
Yeah,
curious
I haven't
question.
looked at that. I have looked at that, but not in a while. I don't, as I recall, I couldn't find a really clear
Yeah, I mean, when this
answer
was the best
on
book that
that.
I could find, this is written in like font 24, and it's
Yeah.
fine, but I'm like, I need more. So that's what,
Yeah.
when you
No,
read.
it's a good, but I will say, regardless of whether the vagus nerve innervates the pineal gland or not,
Hmm.
that it that when you have good vagus nerve functions, those horizontal thresholds in your body are open. And that's very consistent with the Chinese medicine concept of qi flow
Hmm.
as well. So you get good energy flow, good qi flow throughout your body. And the information can get to your pineal gland, whether it comes from above or below.
Hmm.
And as I said earlier, vagus nerve uh, can remap your brain at the highest levels. So it can absolutely change your belief systems and how you think and like in your patterns. And I use it all the time like that in my practice. And uh, so I think that even if it's not directly in your pineal gland, it definitely gives the ability for you to have better intuition. I've taught several years ago, I taught telepathy in the vagus nerve with a friend of mine that's a medium at the Maine Yoga
Cool.
Festival. And like, it was mind blowing how the room did. And so we used the vagus nerve exercises as a warm up to intuition,
Uh,
to the telepathy exercises. And, and it was so fun and so amazing. And I think, and really maybe the secret of what I'm really doing here is helping people improve their intuition.
yeah, I think it just might be.
I have a very clinical approach to it, but no, absolutely. And I tell you, I mean, astrologically, we're moving into an age of intuition
Hmm.
for sure.
We won't have to talk if we don't want to. I mean, it's a special time.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the medical people, when I talk about the way the different mythologies and the astrology or work in the body, that clinicians have all of these especially with chronic patients with chronic illness, like they'll say like, oh gosh, all those people with that diagnosis have this kind of weird personality thing going on.
Mm.
And like, what is that? Or like they have, you get a feeling like, oh, this person's life is a mess, like there's something else happening here that
Hmm.
but in the clinic you don't always have time to address those things, and sometimes it's not even within your scope of
Go.
practice.
Right.
But it gives you a way to ask questions in a very prescriptive manner. If you're asking, if somebody has a head thing, I'm going to ask them, where they're being the hero in someone else's story, perhaps, or if their parents had a very asymmetrical power dynamic. Whereas if somebody has a knee issue, I might ask them where the structure of their life is in the way of the transformation that they
Mm.
want. And so it just gives you a way to really see people at a different in a different way, and to just kind of a little bit of a logical algorithm to intuition.
Well, and I think for the clinical minded, in my experience, you can't refute what this is showing. And so, we get more and more science that shows more and more of what maybe intuitively you've known from the first page turn of
Yeah.
uncovering this. And thank goodness, right? Because it makes it accessible to people that it may not have initially been. Melanie, this is such a pleasure. I would love to direct our guests to follow you. Maybe this is their first time hearing about the vagus nerve and they're still like, what just happened? I don't even know what just happened. But I'm certain that there's some resources. So please spotlight. And if there's any starting point that you want to recommend for people building this intimacy with their vagus nerve, what would be that first step to take aside from finding you?
Well, if you go to my website, which is my name, melanieweller.com, uh, and sign up for my email list, it will email you the link to a free vagus nerve decompression course where I take you through a full body evaluation and treatment. And so you can really you can really use that information to address a lot of things on your own. And all of my social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook the handle is Embody Your Star.
Mm. Awesome. Thank you so much. I was doing some ear pulls before I got started today. Thank you, Melanie, and we'll tag those in the show notes. And thank you all for tuning in for another episode of the Leela Life Show.
Thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Leela Life Show. Be sure to share, like, and comment. Tune in next week. And if you're not already a member of the Leela Life Collective, you'll want to be. So take a look in the show notes and be sure you sign up today. Have a beautiful day.